to talk about theater, new, especially Theater for the New City, which has been around for decades and it is the heart and soul of theater. And as I like to call it, because I used to perform there, if I had a best friend, that would be Theater for the New City. And we are so honored to have Crystal Field here with us to talk about keeping it alive, literally putting on live shows during COVID where they're open through doors shut, whatever. And now she's going to be putting on real theater again. And Bina has been doing plays there for like ever. Jonathan Slaff has been involved with Theater for the City forever. I mean, I wouldn't have half the friends I have if it weren't for Theater for the City and John Mangano getting me involved. So thank you, Crystal Field. So tell us about how you managed to maintain Theater for the City all these years. And I mean, you brought diversity to theater long before anyone else. I mean, you've made it accessible, diverse, everything. It's like everything everyone's screaming about now, you have been doing from the get-go. And people love it. I mean, Charles Busch, Tim Robbins, Edward Albee, all come back to you. F. Murray Abraham, anyone who's ever been at Theater for the City just loves the place.
I started this theater because I was an actor at TLA, the Theater of the Living Arts, and I was an actor at Lincoln Center, the first Lincoln Center company, and the artistic directors and the executive directors of both those theaters were fired by the board. And in the case of Kazan and Whitehead, they were let go because they had one flop with a show they tried to do, The Changeling. They should never have tried to do that show. They should have done Clifford Odets and Eugene O'Neill. But, they gave it a shot. And it was a disaster. Okay, but they never should have been let go over that, except they were. As far as Andre Gregory went, and George Sherman, I remembered his name. He was the executive director. They were let go because when they took me into the company, I brought them a play by Rochelle Owens. They asked me for a modern writer. So I picked Rochelle because she was a brilliant writer, and I brought them a play called Becklec, Beclc, I think is how it was spelled, called Becklec, and it was about a woman empire builder who sat on the people, who sat on her subjects. She literally sat on them. We had a wonderful dance company in that piece. They were an all African-American company that danced during the piece. And of course, she also sat on them. Okay, well, it was a huge hit. But there were people in the community that started to use it politically. Well, that's not the fault of the theater. The theater wasn't doing that. They were just presenting a play. But the board was very upset. And they fired Andre Gregory and George Sherman. Now, in both cases, all the actors, designers, technicians, everything goes with them because they are the ones that are picked by those people. They pick the directors, and the directors pick the actors, and so on. So everyone went. And in the case of Andre Gregory, we were doing a tour that I can't remember the name of, that originally starred the Marx Brothers, and it starred Ron Liebman in the leading role. And it was a huge hit, and we were going all over the country with it. We went all over with it. But at the same time, we knew we were fired. Those were the last two places that I performed. And I said to myself, this is not going to happen again. We are not going to be at the whims of some idiot on the board who has no relationship to theater, no real relationship to theater. All they have is money, and they're going to tell us what to do. So we said, hey, and that's how Theater for the New City really got started. And so from the get-go, I was a very politically active person at the age of 14. So I knew the score as a child. I knew what was going on. And I always knew that it wasn't race. Race was not the problem. It was a question of who was in power, who had the money, who had the, as Karl Marx would say, who had the means of production, who owned the factories, who owned the newspapers, Anyway, we decided we were gonna, do something different. So that's how Theater for the New City really came to exist.
How did you come up with the name Theater for New City?
You know how we got that name? John Lindsay was mayor at the time. John Lindsay was a great person and a great mayor, but he was not a politician. And he ran into a lot of trouble with the unions, especially the sanitation union, and he didn't know how to handle them. And he didn't. But his heart was in the right place. And he talked about a new city, making a new city. And so we named it Theater for the New City, inspired by John Lindsay, who was mayor at the time.
And you had several locations. Where did you start out and where did you end up? And I know you finally paid off the mortgage and it's yours free and clear. You had a big party.
It is. We started out, Larry Kornfeld, George Bartenieff, Theo Barnes, and myself. We were working out of Judson Church, which, by the way, was a great institution and still is to this day, except that at that time they had a couple of incredible artistic people like Al Carmine's connected to them. And we were doing, but at that time, Larry directed a play called Dracula Sabat. And I played Lucy. And eventually everyone in the play becomes naked. That was part of the situation. So, but we were reviewed in the Times, etc. And we were a big, huge hit. And we thought at that time, Larry said, Joan Davidson of the Kaplan Foundation is going to give us a building and we can start our theater. And by the way, that's who started Theater for the New City. Myself, Larry Kornfeld, Theo Barnes, and George Bartenieff. And we were given a building that was the old telephone company. It was the sound stage for the jazz singer. That's the ground floor. That's what it was. It had 2 floors. It had a Bank Street address. It's probably still there. I don't know what it is. It's part of Westbeth, though. And this was part of Westbeth. And Westbeth was an artist colony in Manhattan that they decided to make this building into an art colony. And the original people that lived there had to show that they were making their living in the arts. And of course, they were all crummy livings, but they were doing it. One of the people that lived there was Jean-Claude Van Italy. So they gave us this building, but of course it was just a building. I mean, it was empty. And we made a theater for the new city there. Now they gave us a year and a half rent free. That's what they gave us. So, however, I mean, if I talk only about this, we could be another hour and a half. So you better stop me. Uh, the building was run by a panel of, guess what, artists. Okay. And they were so proud of the fact that they could run something, you know. I mean, financially as well. So behind our backs, they tried to rent it to a video company and informed us that we were going to be out after 6 months. So George and I said, oh no, we have a contract. And we did. We had a lease. We're not leaving. But Theo and Larry said, artists should not be involved in anything except art. And so they resigned from the board. So there was George and I. We slept at the theater. We said, we're not moving. We had tons of volunteer people. And we had done some really great stuff, like Charles Ludlam's play, whose name I have forgotten right now. It may come to me. And other wonderful works. Richard Foreman did his early work with us. So they couldn't get us out. We went to their board of artists, and we said, Jean-Claude Van Italy heard at a cocktail party that we were going to get $12,000 from the National Endowment for the Arts, and we will give it to you as rent. And their answer was, number one, we don't believe you. Number two, it was only a cocktail party where you heard it. It isn't going to happen. And we are so proud. And I remember him saying, we are so proud of the fact that artists can run a place, you know, financially as well as. Well, so after a year and a half, we had to get out. We did have to get out. And we moved physically, we moved the piano and everything else a very short ways away to Jane Street, between Washington and West. It was a welfare hotel, and Ronald Tavel had been there and told me about it and said he had to, I don't know, they had to close their theater, and wouldn't we like to try and get it? And we did. We said, we'll give you the $12,000. And we physically moved with, 30 volunteers. We moved everything over there. Meanwhile, they had signed an agreement with this video company that if they didn't do $17,000 worth of repairs to the building, this video company would not have to pay rent. So for 3 years, the video company was there and never paid rent. And we got our $12,000 and we gave it over to the owners of the welfare building on Jane Street, Jane West, the Jane West. Well, the Jane West was a welfare hotel. You could not live there unless you were over 40 years old and a single man. That was the government regulation for that building. Well, people were dying on our steps. They were vomiting on our steps. There was blood on our steps. We were constantly cleaning up shit and vomit and blood and sometimes people. But the audience didn't use those steps to get into the building. We made 2 theaters there. One was the big theater, and that had its own little steps entrance. and the audience never saw what went on in the back. Now, the back by the way, this building, which still stands, and I think now, of course, it's all gentrified completely, but at the time, I went out on those little audience steps and I yelled, "Hello out there." And there was no answer, because all there was on that block were empty warehouses. That's what was there. The trucks were on the next Washington. Washington, I won't go into what the trucks were. Those of you who know, and nobody else needs to know. But it was a real, I mean, this was a time when a homosexual could get beaten to death and no one would say a word. I mean, this was a terrible time. Anyway, a lot of times the ceiling leaked, and we would have to clean it up quick. Or one of the denizens one time left a pot of rice in the drain of a shower, and the whole thing, flooded, and it flooded on. But the audience never knew anything. And we did things like the Angels of Light. When the Angels of Light performed at our theater, at that time, people stamped their feet for applause. They still do it now, but really not. But in those days, it was standard. Well, they were stamping so hard the building rocked. I mean, when I was there, I said to Anne Harris, one of the wonderful pioneers of theater, I said, "There's nobody here." She said, "Crystal, if you do good work, they'll come." And sure enough, they did. We were between between West and Washington. Uh, it had been a beautiful building. It was a Swedish officer's building, and it had a widow's walk at the top. I mean, but times change. Anyway, we were very successful. And so then, after a number of years, the area changed, incredibly changed, and we couldn't afford. They didn't want $12,000 a year. They wanted money, and we had to leave. We lost our lease. Well, at that time, someone told us, I don't know who it was, about a building over on Second Avenue. And that had been it. Okay, originally it was a church, and they built an apartment house over the church. So the church part was still there, but the rest of the building were, people living there. It was Second Avenue between 10th and 11th, and it had been, early in my career, I had performed in it was the Gate and the Cricket. The Gate Theater upstairs and the Cricket was downstairs. And I performed in the Cricket. I performed in a play that made I can't remember her last name. Rochelle somebody or other, a star. And I don't remember her name. But at any rate, it was a play about Van Gogh. Anyway, I knew that it was a good building because I performed there. So it became a porno movie house. Then it became a key club. Then there was a murder. And so the police had closed it. And so it had been closed for a year. So we got it very cheap. And we got it for $1,250 a month. And the owner uh, was connected to the mafia, but a very nice guy. You know, my long experience tells me very often that there are what you call honest crooks. Uh, they're in crooked businesses, but they're not going to be crooked with you. They're going to play it straight, and you can trust them. And that's what happened. He gave us a lease. We had a lawyer on our board called Peter Collins, and he helped us to craft a lease, and um, we got a lease. They would not give us a 10-year lease. We asked for a 10-year lease. I believe they only gave us a 5-year lease, um, because he knew the place was going to change. But at that time, it was the drug capital of the world.
So anyway, so now let's just say we're at 10th and First now. But just quickly tell us how you got to 10th and First, and then let's talk to Jonathan Slaff, who's been your press agent and actor at Theater for the City. Bill Bradford, who also does the lighting and works box office, and then Mark and me, who I've acted there and performed there and go there all the time. So everyone chime in.
Well, this is a perfect place for me to come in because I entered Theater for the New City as they were moving from Jane Street to Second Avenue. I was in the first show that was produced in the downstairs theater formerly the Cricket. What it was is it was the baptismal font of the Baptist church there, and the audience was down in the well, and we were up on a proscenium, so they would look up at us. And then there was an area to the side where we had the orchestra, because this show that I was in was a musical. It was named Atonements. It was by Chaim and Rina Elisha, and it was based on a Sholem Aleichem story that asked the question, what would happen if the chickens didn't want to die for us on Yom Kippur? I played a chicken and a shachid, which is a ritual slaughterer. It was my first musical in equity production. And then this funniest thing happened. I became the equity deputy because I was a graduate of Columbia Business School and I had a pocket calculator. So I was the only person in the cast who could figure out how to take the cash box office and distribute it among the actors, because the arrangements in those days were that the theater would keep the TDF vouchers and the cash would go to the actors. And it would have been easy for anybody could have done it with arithmetic, but the orchestra changed in number from show to show. Sometimes it was 4, sometimes it was 2. So there was a different denominator to divide by at every show. I met Crystal when she came and introduced herself in the theater on Jane Street. And then when we were over there on Second Avenue, later on, Crystal said, she needed help with a funding application, and she said that she remembered that I had a head for figures, and so she asked me to come in and help with this funding application. And I remained close to the theater after that, and whenever I'd walk by the theater, I'd drop in and I'd say, what do you have going on that I should see? And then the people in the office would tell me. So that way I never missed all the key plays in the mid 70s, late 70s, the early 80s. Well, later on, Crystal asked me to become her press agent. I don't know why she thought I could do it. I think she smelled it on me.
Because your father owned a newspaper company.
True, but it was a circulation company, not an editorial company.
It was close.
Close enough, yeah, close enough. And she gave me a manual, and I read the manual, and she didn't know that I had been a publicist in horse racing and auto racing when I lived in Pennsylvania. So I already knew the craft, but this was a different beat. Anyway, it was the same thing right over. Everything was immediately transferable. It's funny how life is like that. And the Times critics that came to TNC in the first season that I worked for Crystal, they kept telling me, you're going to be very successful at this because you're a good writer. I didn't think I was a good writer, but they did. What it is that I wrote in acceptable grammar, whereas my brethren working on Broadway and commercial off-Broadway did not. It's a dirty little secret that the press agent community in New York is basically they're in the Don Buchwald, the late DJR Buchwald, told me that when they have downtime in the book review, they would hang up the press releases written by my brethren on the wall and laugh at them. So, so I got a lot of respect for being a grammatical writer. And after that, I spread around the village like a virus. And I became the press agent for La Mama and Jean Cocteau Rep, which was good because I got to represent classics and avant-garde theater of a different flavor over at La Mama. And I had beginner's luck. I was very successful. A lot of shows won Obies, and the theater won Obies, and everybody was very happy. So, and I'm still doing it. And now I'm considerably older. But Theater for the New City is a place for beginnings. I did my first musical there. I took my first theatrical photos there. I wrote my first theatrical press releases for Theater for the New City. I did my first theatrical leads at Theater for the New City because Crystal wrote a play, and she gave me the leading part. It was about a guy who a playwright with writer's block who goes to a Rockefeller estate upstate in the area where she has a vacation home, which is haunted. And it was a funny comedy. And Crystal also wrote a play that was a vaudeville to take to Italy in a cultural exchange with a company from L'Aquila. That's the little city, a little mountain city north of Rome that was destroyed by an earthquake I guess it's about 10 years ago now. And then I did my first solo show, Duet for Solo Voice by David Scott Milton. That was in 2010. And that was the most important event in my life to me, because it was the first time I was really good.
First, a brief apology for interrupting Mr. Slaff's fascinating history with the Theater for the New City. Once we got started on today's show, it quickly became clear that we wouldn't be able to cover the subject on our allotted 28 minutes. So we've decided to divide our conversation with Crystal Field, Jonathan Slaff, and Bill Bradley, who has so far appeared only briefly, between today, April 24th, and our next show on May 8th. So please join us then for part 2 of our discussion on Theater for the New City.